When you really boil it all down, so much of human history is just about one thing: a raw, constant struggle for power. I mean, think about it. Power can build empires, right? It can spark incredible innovation, create order from chaos. But, and this is a huge but, if you leave that power unchecked, it can just as easily lead to complete destruction.
So, that's the big question, isn't it? What's the deciding factor? What's the secret sauce that channels that basic human drive for power toward building things up instead of tearing them down? Well, to figure that out, we're going to have to look at the two sides of this coin. On one side, you've got the raw, chaotic force of political violence. And on the other, you've got the structured, organized promise of democracy.
All right, so let's jump right in. We'll start with the messy side of things, the unmanaged force of power. We're talking about political violence. It's what happens when all the normal rules of the game just completely break down.
And look, it is so important to get this straight right from the get-go. Political violence is not the same as, say, a random mugging. This is different. It's deliberate, it's force with a purpose, a very clear political goal behind it. Maybe the goal is to overthrow a government, or maybe it's to resist an occupying army, or even just push a certain ideology. So why does this happen? Well, it's almost never just one thing. The causes are really layered. It can start small with just one person's grievance, but then it can escalate, pulling in whole groups, maybe based on ethnicity or religion or class. And honestly, a lot of the time, the state itself is the one pouring gasoline on the fire, through its own weakness or corruption or by cracking down on its people. It creates the perfect storm for violence.
Okay, let's break this down a little more, because there are two terms that people mix up all the time: terrorism and revolution. So, terrorism. That's when the violence is specifically aimed at civilians. The whole point is to create fear, to terrorize people into making a political change. A revolution, though, that's a different beast altogether. We're talking about a massive, large-scale attempt to overthrow the entire system. It's often violent, for sure, but the goal is a complete and total transformation of society.
All right, now let's flip the coin and look at the other side. If political violence is basically power with no rules, then democracy is humanity's best attempt at creating those rules. It's a whole system designed from the ground up to handle that exact same struggle for power, but to do it in a way that doesn't just descend into chaos.
And, we got to remember, democracy is so much more than just showing up to vote every couple of years. It's a whole ecosystem, really. Yeah, power rests with the people, but that power gets channeled through things like participation, it's protected by the rule of law, and it's expressed through fundamental rights that every single person is supposed to have.
I mean, this idea didn't just pop out of nowhere. It's been on a long, long journey, evolving for thousands of years. You can trace it all the way back to the first experiments in direct democracy in ancient Athens. Then jump forward to the Enlightenment, when these revolutionary ideas about individual rights started taking hold. And then you see these massive waves of democracy spreading across the globe after huge events like World War II and the end of the Cold War.
And here's the thing. Even today, democracy isn't a one-size-fits-all deal. Different countries use different models, and each one has its pros and cons. Take a parliamentary system. It's usually pretty efficient, but you don't have as much separation of powers. Then you've got a presidential system. That gives you a clear separation for sure, but you run the risk of total political gridlock. And then there's a kind of hybrid, the semi-presidential model, which tries to get the best of both worlds but can end up with its own messy power struggles.
But no matter which model you're looking at, any democracy that actually works relies on the same core parts, the same nuts and bolts. You've got to have separate branches of government keeping each other in check. You need political parties to kind of organize the national conversation and give citizens a way to connect with the government. But honestly, the foundation of the whole thing, what holds it all up, is the protection of basic rights and liberties. That's the promise: equality and freedom. So we've got chaos on one side and order on the other. What happens when these two forces smash into each other? Now, this is where it gets really interesting. This is the heart of it right here. Understanding how a democratic system is actually built to withstand the kinds of pressure that could otherwise lead to violence. The best way to think about it is like this. Democratic institutions are basically pressure release valves. So instead of letting all these grievances and frustrations build up and up until something explodes, democracy gives them a safe place to go. Elections and parties, that's how you give people a voice. An independent court system, that makes sure the rules of the game are fair for everybody. Checks and balances, that's your safeguard against any one person or group getting way too powerful. And things like free speech, that guarantees that even ideas we don't like get heard, instead of being violently suppressed. And this brings us to a really crucial point. Political conflict, that's totally normal. In fact, it's unavoidable. People are always going to disagree. But political violence, that is not inevitable. The thing that makes all the difference, the thing that decides whether conflict stays peaceful or boils over into violence, is the health of those institutions. They are, quite literally, the firewall. And of course, the opposite is true too. When that firewall gets weak, when the courts become corrupt, when people stop believing the elections are fair, when voices of dissent get crushed, well, those pressure release valves get completely clogged. The system just can't handle the conflict peacefully anymore. And that's when the risk of a violent explosion just goes through the roof. Okay, so all of this brings us right to the present day. Because this dance between democratic order and the potential for violence, it's not some dusty old topic from a history book. It is an ongoing live challenge, and the threats to that order are changing all the time. And let's be honest, the challenges that democracies are facing right now are pretty serious, and they're coming from all directions. You've got this erosion of trust from the inside, often driven by populism and just a general breakdown of basic political norms. You've got a full-blown information crisis, with misinformation and disinformation making it almost impossible for people to agree on what's even true. And underneath it all, you have this growing crisis of faith in the system, a feeling that it's not fair, often fueled by huge economic inequality. Which leaves us with one last really big question to think about. The whole promise of democracy, right, is that it can manage our conflicts peacefully. But it's not some static thing we built once and can forget about. It's a living, breathing system. So as the pressures of our modern world keep mounting and changing, the real test, the ultimate test for all of us, is whether our democratic systems can evolve and adapt right along with them.